in the moment of you sharing where you were, it was obvious that there was a misunderstanding with regards to God's love.
Indeed.
There was a misunderstanding regarding God's grace. And that in the moment, it was my job to help you get a better understanding. And because you had an awareness of Scripture, you made that very simple for me. Although you might, looking back, think that, you know, I thought you were a pain in the behind. It was a blessing, as I'm recalling, having the opportunity to sow into you seeds of life.
Yes.
In the midst of your life that was completely broken.
Absolutely.
So I really want you to share with us how your brokenness set you up for change.
So, that encounter, I believe, happened around 2012. This encounter that we really first met and interacted. And from that time forward to the time that really God finally delivered me from that life was another 2 years. And during that 2-year period of time, my addiction began to progress worse and worse, and got into more and more harder drugs, and just really, my life really spiraled out of control. And drugs owned and dictated my life, and owned and dictated what I did.
Yeah, you know, we learn how people that have mental illness often self-medicate using substances. And while I'm not here to diagnose you, it does seem that that is a component of your story.
Absolutely.
And hopefully we'll be able to come back to that. But as you share this brokenness with us, because you said it took 2 more years.
Yes.
And then what happened?
So eventually I experienced another stint of homelessness, because there was always stints of homelessness where I would get homeless and then get some type of housing or come up in some way. So I went through my last stint of homelessness, and I don't know, that just something within me had just broke. My spirit had just broke, my body had just broke, my soul, my mind, everything had just broke. And I was no longer able to tolerate and deal with homelessness and just the way my life was going. And there were moments of thoughts of suicide. There were moments, I can remember sitting in an abandoned house with a knife to my chest, and my hand like hovering over, ready to plunge it in. Because I was just in. I was just done. I was at my wit's end with my own self, with my own life, and an inability to control my use of drugs and alcohol, and my use, and just inability to control my life, period. So I got to this breaking point, and I ended up going to a rehab facility. Absolutely. So they took me right off the street. I went into there, and it was there that change started to happen. And I became willing to listen to the people there. And slowly I became willing to listen to God. Something happened that I began to get a new perspective on what I thought God was doing in my life. And there were many people in my life that helped and mentored me and kind of shaped this and mold this new understanding of what God was really up to and what God was doing in my life. And that God had not abandoned me. He had not left me. He had placed me there to save my life.
Say that again.
He had placed me there in St. Jude's to save my life.
That's huge. I know that you're referring to me and calling me a mentor.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm just your brother in Christ.
Indeed.
But it was during that time that I started working on what I've now called the Suit Up series.
Yeah.
And I remember my coach telling me that I needed to have an avatar so that as I wrote, I'd know who I was writing to. And I said, oh, I already have an avatar. It's Ray Shaw. And, you know, I set out on this journey and wrote this book. And by the time it got to editing, the editor told me, this is too big for one book. You've got at least 2 or 3 books here. And, you know, it was amazing to me that what I would eventually release would be a 2-volume set, which I call the Suit Up series, which is available on my website. And you were quick to get it.
Yes.
To my amazement. And I kind of felt bad as the author because I didn't have copies because all my copies were sold and I couldn't give you. And you said, well, I'm just going to go buy it. So you went and you bought it. You mind showing the audience?
Absolutely. This is volume 1 and volume 2, and it was, I think it was around 2 years into me being free from drugs and alcohol that I really came in contact specifically with the Suit Up
Please
series.
Also note that in this period you were no longer homeless.
I was no longer homeless.
So Rashawn, you've shared a lot of information with us, and
Yes.
There's so much evidence of transformation. And you were talking about the brokenness,
Yeah.
where God actually moved in your life.
Yeah.
This is where I come in as a constant source of feeding you God's word, and how you were just eating it, sucking it up like a sponge, if you will.
Yes.
And I knew that I was on to something in the way of servicing you, but I really couldn't tell what the outcome was going to be. There was a whole lot of moving parts going on in your life, and you found your way into a home, and you had roommates.
Yeah, recovery center and being around, you know, other residents. And there were moments of difficulty just adjusting to really kind of being reacclimated into society. And they did a good job in using those stages of having stages in place of reacclimating me into society and reacclimating us. And it reminds me a little bit of the movie The Shawshank Redemption, in that one of the characters in it spent 50 years in prison, got out of prison, and couldn't reacclimate into society, and ended up killing himself as a result of.
Right.
Because of the difficulty being institutionalized, being so used to being inside, not being able to be used outside. So there were difficulties at first in just cleanliness, like just remembering I have access to a shower, I can take a shower.
Oh, wow.
Because it had gone on for so long that I didn't have certain access to things. I need to eat became more important than me taking a shower. I need to find food. Well, we'll find a shower later. So things of that nature, and just getting used to having a bed and like making my bed. So things of that nature. So it was a process, but God really removed a lot of the residue from my old life and what was happening with my old way of life. He did a good job of removing that residue and helping me reacclimate back into society. So I'm very grateful for His grace in that area.
Yes, yes. Bringing in God's grace is huge, because now you're at a place where you're actually realizing the efficacy of God's grace and God's love in your life. It was not an experience when you were on the street, but amazingly, as you were being restored, that became a part of your reality, where God was present, God loved you, and God's grace was providing for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in the journey of transitioning, the question that I have is, being institutionalized while you went into the system and the shelter system here in Atlanta, you never were jailed, you never were incarcerated, is that right?
No.
Yeah. Was it ever a point in your homelessness experience where you thought going to jail was a way out?
Not for me, not that specifically. I did a lot of times think of death being the way out.
Death was the way out.
Yeah, I dealt with suicidal ideations a lot during those times.
It's interesting you say suicidal ideations. What that tells us is somewhere in the course of your experience with the local systems here in Atlanta to help you rehabilitate, someone shared that with you. A professional had to share that word with you.
Absolutely.
For you to be able to use it.
That's not a word that I came up with.
Yeah, but as counseling students, you know, we have to consider where the client is at with suicidal tendencies. So, you know, that's very frank of you, and I thank you for your honesty. As we wrap this thing up, I know today that not only has God changed your life, He's revolutionized the quality of your life. You've had some extreme opportunities come your way. Share that with us as we wrap this up.
So some of the opportunities that's come my way has been the opportunity to now be enrolled in school at Carver College, studying my bachelor's degree in biblical studies.
Biblical studies, no less.
Biblical studies. Yes, indeed. Through all of that, God is definitely calling me into the field of ministry. So, and I'm sure He'll use all of my experience in that. I'm currently, because of I was living in a place, our lease was up, and just haven't been able to find an alternative living situation. So I'm currently staying with my mother at the time, but hopefully it'll be brief.
But it's how amazing is that?
But it's a beautiful thing, because it's something that it's a beautiful thing because where I started is now where I am.
Yeah.
So God has brought me back to the starting place.
Yeah. And how much more rich is the relationship between you and your mom today?
180 degrees different.
Yeah.
Night and day.
It was probably hard for your mom to demonstrate tough love and kicking you out of her home.
I am able to see and recognize that today. That is not something that I was able to see and recognize, because my mother has a very tough exterior. So she doesn't particularly show emotion in that capacity. Those types of emotions. She has a very tough exterior. But there were moments in time where those things surfaced, and I was able to see them. And I'm able to see them now.
Yeah, today it's clear as day.
And today it's clear that those things were there, that it was not an easy process. That was not easy for her to have to do that to her own self.
And you have brothers and sisters. What number are you in your family?
I am the youngest.
You're the baby.
I'm the baby of the family.
Yeah. And being a parent of 3, I know that if my daughter were in the circumstances you described, regardless of what she was doing, it would be extremely hard for me to kick her out into the street. And while she's a girl and you're a guy, I want to just say publicly that it doesn't matter, boy or girl, they're your children.
Yeah.
And it's like throwing them to the wolves, as you described. And knowing that if you don't move on behalf of my child, there's nothing left for me to do, is an extremely courageous move. And thank God that your mom had the wherewithal to trust in God concerning your well-being. And now today, you're actually able to be under her roof in a familial environment that's relatively healthy.
And more obedient. In a more obedient manner.
Yeah.
Which is something through God's grace that He has given me the opportunity to see.